Okay, everybody, good afternoon. Welcome to the IronEdge Group and our webinar series that we've been putting together for all of you folks working at home and remote, or looking to get some information on some topics that are near and dear to everybody recently. We've done some webinars around maximizing teams with your remote workforce. We were working with remote security groups last week. This week on our IT services division is going to be talking about business continuity planning. And I'm excited to go through that with you guys. Just a little bit of housekeeping. If you have questions, there's a questions and answers box that you can click on, and you can submit your questions to us. And if you do, we'll try to answer those either in text form or hold them to the end so that our host will be able to provide you that input and give that information back to the entire group. I want to let you guys know about who's going to be presenting today. So I'm going to introduce to you our team, Dan Mallard. Dan Mallard is a consultant with the IronEdge Group. He is an account manager and he manages our professional services division. He is an LSL Green Belt. He is a project management professional, and he has a degree in business administration. He's been doing IT for 16 years with a background in business consulting. His focus has really been around some of our larger accounts, specifically the ones that are required to have governance, audit and compliance, mostly the ones that are requiring to have a significant amount of process, and the ones that require business continuity planning, disaster management, incident command and control, and audit response for federal and state controls. So he's a fantastic resource for us, and we're excited to talk to him a little, to have him talk to you guys a little bit about what business continuity is and how it works. Last bit of housekeeping, let me tell you a little bit about who IronEdge is. If you're not familiar with us, we're an IT services provider in Texas, although we have clients all over the United States. Most of our clients come to us when they're frustrated with the hassle and complexity of their technology, or their staff is feeling overwhelmed and unable to be strategic. So when organizations get to a certain size and they're concerned about how to put together an effective IT strategy or solution, they come to us, they ask us for help, whether that's building out business continuity plans, focusing on the disaster management and disaster recovery plans, helping to build resilient and mobile IT infrastructure for their workforce to function in a disaster. Those are the types of things that we excel at and really distance ourselves from our competition based on the experience that we have and the brain power that we have on this team, including Dan. So that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Dan and let him get started with his presentation.
Thank you, Andrew. Welcome, everybody. I'm excited to be here. I am joining you from the IronEdge San Antonio Control Center. So this is it. There's two people in this building. So we are safely social distancing. I hope you're all safe and well right now. Okay, so today we're going to talk about business continuity planning. In a moment, we're going to talk about definitions of BCP planning versus the plan versus DR. But right now, we're going to start with this. My goal for you as business leaders, as managers, as team members, is that when we're done with this presentation, you'll understand the concepts we're about to talk about. You're going to understand them well enough that you can go to your teammates and ask, do we do this? Do we have a BCP? Do we have a planning process? Have we considered these things? And if no, the people on this call today are going to be able to provide direction on how to move forward. So according to the slide, we're going to have a concept breakdown. I'm going to talk to you about where to begin and what is the investment, how much you're going to have to spend. And I'm going to also explain to you the journey in this process and why the journey is valuable here. It's not the destination. It's not this deliverable that comes at part of the journey. The actual journey is what we want to talk about today. So here we go. Business continuity plan, the BCP, the why and the what. Let's talk about those things first. So first, why develop and use a BCP? Why do you need one of these things? Now, obviously the world is in a situation where we're all dealing with the pandemic across the United States, across the city of San Antonio, across Houston, across everywhere. Now, imagine I pull up in my DeLorean, I say, look, we've got a flux capacitor, it can go back 5 weeks. Jump in, we're going to take you back in time. Now, imagine going back 5 weeks, and what would you tell yourself? What would you tell yourself? And I put a giant Charmin toilet paper roll on the slide. Would you tell yourself personally, invest in toilet paper? Would you tell yourself personally, get a haircut? You know, get your nails done, because you're not gonna be able to do that for a while. What would you tell yourself personally? And then also, what would you tell yourself professionally? What would you tell your teammates, the owner of your company? What would you explain to them that would make their response in the current pandemic better or more effective? So the reason that you develop and use a BCP plan and system is in a situation like we have today, where you have an event that disrupts the business operations for you. You want to limit and be prepared for loss of revenue. You want to understand that something's going to happen. You may not have the revenue streams coming in that you normally have. You want to be prepared for that. You want to return to operations quicker. For example, when we all started working from home, and by we all, I mean the United States, generally 2-3 weeks ago, it took some folks days, if not a week, to get all of their operations up and running. How are we going to do that quicker? That's part of the BCP. That's part of the planning process and the plan. You want, by using a BCP, you want a smooth experience for your employees. You want them to have less anxiety. And for your customers as well. You want to keep your customers confident that you have a plan, you've communicated with them effectively, they know what's happening with you, and they stay confident and they continue using your business. If IronEdge would not have responded and had a delayed response to the current environment in the world, we would lose customer faith. You also don't want to lose market share due to a delayed response. So I'll tell you a quick story for IronEdge in particular. What we found as we started working remotely, which we do multiple times a year, we have multiple tests of our business continuity plan several times a year where we all work from home and mimic different scenarios. Now, this time during the pandemic, we all started working from home, which is completely normal for us to do. We built all of our systems around it. But what we found was potentially the most impacted part of our business was our face-to-face sales and related interactions with people. We like to get in front of people, to meet people. Cassandra Richard, who's on the call today, is one of our senior sales folks. She likes to get out and meet people. And as part of our sales process, we like to see people's environments and bring in some of our technical staff. And they like to evaluate the environment inside the environment. Well, we found very quickly once the pandemic started and we all were basically bound to our houses, that we couldn't do that as we normally could. And it took us a couple days, literally a brainstorm, to figure out how are we going to pivot? How are we going to change the way that we get in front of people and earn folks' trust and have virtual environmental reviews? And after a few days of sort of working that out, we've adjusted and we moved forward. Now, that's what we found for our business, that we had to figure out and then adjust to move forward in the current environment. Now, another example I want to give you is, we'll talk about Zoom for a moment. So Zoom, of course, as soon as the pandemic event happened, especially in the United States, everybody started using Zoom to communicate, which is terrific. It's terrific for Zoom as a business, right? So schools are using it, my kids are using it, we're using it, everybody's using it. Lots of people are getting into Zoom. It's become a hugely important and popular thing across all of business and all of education and socially. Well, what that did was it created a large target for bad actors to get in and mess with the Zoom systems, to Zoom bomb presentations, to see what people were talking about. Now, I wonder if the Zoom team, and I'm sure they have a very developed team and they have terrific BCP plans. I wonder if in their pandemic response plan that they likely have, if they considered that, if there's a pandemic and we have a huge increase in people accessing our system, what do we need to do to secure our system to mitigate all the new people that want to get inside? So that's interesting to me. I wonder how they responded, and I wonder what they thought of before the pandemic and what they would change potentially now. So maybe they lost market share, maybe they didn't, but that's why you want to have a BCP plan, to try to anticipate those things and respond well when you have to. So now I'm going to jump quickly to terminology. So this is what we're talking about today. So there's a few terms, people use them they mix them all up. Let's talk about them very, very quickly. Business continuity planning is a process, right? happens all the time. It's ongoing. It's iterative. It's preventative and proactive. It's the process that we go through to ensure that our business is running in events that would cause it not to run very well. Now, as a result of your planning process, you've created a plan. It's a thing. Imagine it as a book with instructions in it. It's a deliverable. Now, that's not the end result. And I talked about that at the beginning. The journey is what's important, not this destination, the book that you create. Now, the result is a plan, but this is what you're going to see here in the slides is the process is iterative and it's cyclical and it just keeps going. So you have the planning process, you have this plan that's created, and then you have disaster recovery. And as a side note, DR plans. Now, disaster recovery is part of and contained within your BCP planning processes and your BCP plan. So that's how they're all interrelated. Now, we've talked about the why and the what. Let's talk about the process. So you go out to Google and you Google business continuity processes and plans and everything else. You're going to find a whole lot of crazy stuff, right? It's just going to overwhelm you. And it's going to seem super complicated, and it's going to seem like a lot of information. A lot of people are going to look at it and go, yeah, I don't have time for this. This isn't, I can't deal with this right now. I've got a lot of other stuff to do, right? Well, my advice to you and our firm is, our advice to you is don't become overwhelmed on this, right? This doesn't have to be complicated, and getting wrapped up in the weeds of a Google result can be overwhelming. It's not as hard or as complicated as you may think. There's commonalities in everything that you research related to BCP process planning. Now, the commonalities are, if you look at all the little things that I have up on the screen, they're all cyclical. They all repeat over all the little components go in a little circle around and around and around, right? So that's important. And also what I'm going to do today is I'm going to take everything that you're seeing on the screen and I'm going to boil those down into 5 components that you need to know. So the last thing I want you to take away from this slide is don't be overwhelmed. This is a process that can be done for free. It requires effort, and you can literally begin with paper and pencil, right? So as long as you have the right team's feedback, you can begin putting together your business continuity plan. So let's talk about the concepts needed to develop the BCP plan next. So these are the 5 concepts. This is what I boiled it down to. This is my version. If you go out and you Google the concepts of BCP, I don't believe you're going to find Wrangle anywhere, right? It's the Texan in me. I was born in El Paso, right? We're a Texas firm. We want to wrangle stuff. So what I did, I tried to boil down the concepts in basically these are the components of it. Okay, so number 1, wrangling. You're wrangling information, simple as that. Number 2, you're brainstorming. You're brainstorming what what events could happen that would interrupt my business. That's it. Number 3, you're creating plans around those 2 things. You're taking the information that you wrangled, you're taking these potential events, and you're creating plans around those to address those. Number 4, you're teaching what you've created already to your team. You're teaching it so everybody can understand how to respond, where information is. You're going to teach. Number 5, after you've done all that, you've wrangled, you've brainstormed, you've created, you've taught, then you're going to test. Right? You're going to test what you have in place and see how it works. And then you're going to take the results of those tests and you're going to repeat the whole process. Simple as that. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about wrangling. So concept number 1, first part of this is wrangling, and I put the little lasso. So what you're doing, and I mentioned it a second ago, is you're wrangling information. Now, what are you wrangling, right? That's the most obvious question. Well, I ask you, what are your core business processes that you have to have happen to run your business, right? And if I boil that down, that means how do you take money, how do you take payment, and how do you deliver goods, right? How do you do those things, and how does your business run around those things? What's key and absolutely needed for you to operate? So that's the goal of wrangling information. You need to understand what those things are, what the keys are for you to operate. Now, I'm going to break that out into 4 main areas to research and to gather information on in the wrangling process. The first one, assets. You need assets to execute your job, right? You may need servers and computing infrastructure. You may need manufacturing equipment. We have a lot of clients that manufacture stuff. You might need point of sale systems to take money and to run your business. We have clients that use point of sale systems. You have to be able to take in money, right? Maybe it's at a physical location where they need to take in money there. You might be an AC repair shop and you need vans to get to your client sites, right? You need automobiles. You could be in any number of businesses and need tools, need physical tools that you hold on to. It could be digital tools that you use. We need plenty of digital tools here at IronEdge. You may need ERP systems or application systems or software. You may need these things, right? Assets generally stuff that you bought, stuff that you own. So of the stuff you own, what do you absolutely need to run your business? It can be raw materials, right? So you're going to gather information on these things. You can get your mind wrapped around them. You're gonna understand things like, for assets, for a computing system, what is it? What is the serial number? What's the warranty information look like? How do I get support for it? How did I configure it? How does it talk to other systems? So on and so forth. It's a mental exercise, right? How is it set up? How does it work? How would I configure it? How does it talk to other stuff? And you're going to document all that, right? So we're going to talk about brainstorming here in a second, but there's a brainstorming component of understanding what you have. You document it, and then you move on to the next step. So next, talked about assets. I'm going to move over to vendors. You need to understand what vendors you do business with. Now, some of you folks may be in a firm small enough that the owner knows every vendor personally. Now, as you grow and you scale, that may not be the case. That may be the case with us. Our owner may know every vendor, but maybe not. So you need to gather information on the vendors that you work with. These could be suppliers of raw material. They could be software manufacturers. Here at IronEdge, we use a core software to run our business, right? It's involved in everything. It's involved in our service of our clients, right? Our ticketing system runs through it. Our professional services project system runs through it. Our billing system, all these components, key components of our company run through this one software. Well, the vendor that provides that software to us is a key person it's a key member of our operations, right? The vendor. We need to understand how do we get a hold of them if there's a problem? What does their contract say that they provide us? How quickly should they respond in the case of an issue? You want to understand what vendors you use, because then you can understand what alternate vendors you may need in the case of a disaster. For example, your vendor may be your ISP vendor. There's any number of vendors you could have, but one interesting one, I've done a lot of work with property management companies, right? And they manage these apartment complexes. Well, vendors that they use that are critical to the health of their business are one make-ready vendors. That's people that come in and paint and prep apartments after people move out. That's critical. You need to turn units. You need to get people in your apartments. If you don't have anybody designated to do that, that's a problem. Number two, a lot of times they have a third party come pick up the trash, say from the door from every apartment. You absolutely can't have trash piling up. That would be a health issue. So who is that vendor? How do you get a hold of them? What are alternatives to that vendor? So gathering that information, incredibly valuable. The next slide is on services. So services, you need to document your services. You understand what you have, what they need to operate. So common services are internet, power, and water. So look at those services, document the same thing that I said a minute ago. You want to understand what agreements you have in place. For example, what internet speeds should you get? How to escalate issues with each of those vendors. You want to document all that information, right? If you have alternative ways that you already have in place to get those things, you need to document those as well. Really think it through. Maybe you have an alternate way you get power. Maybe you have a generator. Who provides the gas for the generator? In a disaster, how do you get that thing serviced? You want to gather as much information as you can about these things and just get it together. So if any of these things have prerequisites to operate correctly, you'll need to document that too. For example, do you need particular equipment for your internet to work? Maybe you need some specialized hardware. Maybe you need a specialized configuration for your internet to work correctly. Well, that's what you gather during this phase. So the final thing I'm going to talk about here is employees. So this is an interesting subject because you need to know what employees you absolutely need to run your business. Everybody thinks they're needed, right? But who do you need to run your business? Now, different departments may have different feedback on who's important to run the business, right? You may have every department represented, and everybody's saying, well, this employee is important and this employee is important. And there may be some disagreements, and everybody's going to have to come together to figure this out. Now, by discussing what employees are needed and the position those employees have, you're going to unearth some interesting things in the process, right? You're going to unearth that Jane, the person in accounting, is the only person that knows how this critical business system runs. She's the only person. She's been here 20 years. She's the only person that knows where it lives, how it's licensed, what vendor supports it. It's installed on her computer and not a server. As you understand what's critical, you're going to be able to see things like that related to your employees, but it's going to help you mitigate risk in the future. As you're understanding the employees that you need, I would advise you not to, say, well, the needed employees are Jane and Dan Mallard. Well, you're going to try to get out of the habit of using their names, rather use their position in reference to everything you're going to build out. I'm the pro services manager. Pro services manager is needed because of these things, right? That's important, because if Jane retires the day before you have some type of event and all of your documentation says Jane is the person that does these things or has these things, and Jane's not around, what do you do? All right. Okay. So those are the things that you gather information on and you wrangle the information on. And once you have a good handle of those things, you'll move on to the next phase here, which is brainstorming. So let's move on to that. Okay. So you gathered information, you go to the brainstorming phase. What is that? Well, generally speaking, you're going to pick a team of people. You're going to put them in a room, very likely for multiple sessions, and you're going to brainstorm how to continue your operations versus different events that could happen to you. You're going to brainstorm these things. You're going to understand what will go away in certain events, how to respond to that, and then you're going to document all of that. So you'll need to pick the right people for the room. Sometimes you have everybody internal. Sometimes you need to pull in a consultant for your IT, like us, that can speak to maybe different levels of your IT systems. But you're going to get the right people at the room. All essential business units are represented into this. Now, know beforehand, everybody will have different opinions and understanding of needs, and that's okay. It's better to get that out in the brainstorming sessions and kind of come to agreement rather than doing it in the middle of some type of business continuity event, right? So as you're brainstorming situations, you're going to brainstorm how you would respond and what would be affected according to your operations in many different scenarios, right? Natural disasters, man-made disasters, utility failures, cyber attacks, sabotage. You're gonna understand and document what that you need to run your business will be affected in each of those scenarios and how to respond to that. That's the goal of this. One thing to keep in mind, don't only address things that you think are most likely for your business. Right? Over time, address other issues. I think if we all went back in the Wayback Machine, we got in the DeLorean and we went back in time again, there's a great number of us that would not have considered a pandemic something to consider. Right? Some of us did, and I've worked with clients that had pandemic response plans, and I've talked to them since this all happened. But some of us maybe not. So you want to address multiple different scenarios. I'm going to jump to the next slide. So example one, I'm going to give you a couple examples here just to kind of get the wheels turning a little bit, get you to think about this. So example one, say you have a critical application, like IronEdge, we do. We have a critical application. Say that thing is offline, and you don't know when it's going to get online. So in this example, say you have an application that runs your business, and the application vendor patches it once a week. Well, something about that patch happened, and it took this critical application and made it unusable. Well, that's a good example of something that you need to brainstorm and understand how that affects you and what you would do. So let me stop here and say, when you're in a real event and you are trying to decide what to do first, the first thing should always be related to communication. All of your plans need to have communication woven through them. So in an actual response, you consult your plan, you look at who's in charge, look at how we handle this, and then arguably most importantly, who communicates these things, who communicates with the client. So in a real event, that would be your first order of action. Now, assuming all that stuff's out of the way and we're just brainstorming, how do you get this application back up and running? Can you get it back up and running? Can you restore databases? Do you have copies of databases? Do you have backups? Does the vendor provide support? Do you even have a support agreement? These are important things to consider as you're brainstorming how to respond to different DR scenarios. So, other things that I would consider are there alternative ways to do whatever this core platform does? If the core platform runs most of your business, can you pay people some other way? Is there another system you can use? Can you take money some other way? Is there some other system you can use? Can you run your operations in some manner other than using the system? Now, it's okay to answer no to a lot of these things that we're going to talk about. That's the value. That's the journey I'm talking about, and not the destination. The journey is what's going to reveal these things. Theoretically, you'll then document the things that you're going to have trouble with, and you can address those, right? So that's example one. You have a critical application online. What are you going to do? How are you going to respond? Where's the data? How are you going to get it back? You'll document those things, note your understanding of what you would do, and that would be documented for you to have and then build on in the future. So example number two, this is actually pretty common. It's important to us. It's near and dear to our IronEdge hearts because we're located in Houston. All the roads sort of around our big corporate office flood. They all just flood. And there's times when we can't get into our corporate office. It's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with it. We just can't get to it. So this is a very common BCP scenario or disaster scenario. And it should certainly be part of your planning exercises. So, it's site inaccessible. So this could be any number of things. I was in a BCP related meeting where one of the examples that was given was there are train tracks out back, and as part of our plan, we have to plan for a train derailment, and a train derailment that has some type of potential chemical or some type of issue where we can't access this building because the train is literally 45 feet right over there. So what do we do? The site's inaccessible, right? The detail of why the site accessible is not really necessary other than having mock responses to it. But your DR plan should take a generalized category like site's inaccessible, doesn't matter why, what do you do, right? Well, again, I spoke last slide, first things first, in a real situation, you consult your plan, who's in charge, how are we handling, how are we communicating, right? That's always the case. Now, realizing this is just a brainstorming situation. In this scenario, your site's inaccessible. So what alternatives do you have? If the office is inaccessible, what can be accessed remotely? Okay, so you know that. What systems need to be accessed from the building, if any? Now, if there are some, and you've established that it's a possible scenario for you to not be able to access those things at all, well, that gives you something to put on your checklist to address pretty quickly in your operations and budgeting and everything else. But you're going to find these things that you're going to say, well, going through this scenario, I found something that we need to address right away. Great, put it to the side and you start addressing that. But again, it's the journey through this that's going to find those things. It's incredibly valuable. So, of course, the value of the process is finding these type of issues. So what I want to move now to is the actual. So we've talked about the wrangling. We've talked about brainstorming different events and just gathering data and trying to get smart and creating potential plans. Now I want to go to number 3, which is actually create. So you have all this information, you have all this data. The create phase doesn't have to be hard or complicated. Right? You can begin to create the planning phase, how you create your plans in response with a paper and a pencil. I've said that before and I'll say it again. By this phase, you determine what you need, right? You've identified different scenarios that could affect your company. You know what you need to operate. You know how those things work together. You have the data. During this phase, the creation phase, is you determine what your response is, right? And I'm going to say it over and over and over. As you create your plan, note that communication both internally and externally is critical. Now, during this phase, during the creation phase, you're going to document, solidify procedures and guidelines for your response. You're going to document your roles and responsibilities, who does what. You're going to put together plans on how to respond to everything. Now, this doesn't have to be hard or complicated. Perfect is the enemy of good. Start with something. Something is better than nothing. You get these components, just parts of them in place, and you can build over time. Remember I said it's an iterative process, right? The plans are going to get better and more mature and address more things and just generally be better things the more you iterate through the process. So through iteration, the process, the plans will get better and more detailed, which is good. This is absolutely to be expected. So I want to show you this next slide here, which is, okay, I wanted to show you that there's lots of, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There was a wheel on the last slide. You don't have to reinvent it. There's plenty of resources on the internet. FEMA has a bunch to help you put a plan together. Now, what you'll see on the screen there is the two documents on the left. That's some paper plans that you can print out and sort of fill in, and then you have plans. And in the middle part of the slide, there's this really cool little downloadable program where you can kind of go into it and you can create your own BCP plan. Well, I'm going to tell you right now, you don't need that. You don't need any of that stuff to get started. You need a paper and a pencil and the right people in the room, right? You just get your thoughts out on paper and you're beginning to create a plan. You don't necessarily, those tools are great, but you don't need those to move forward. All right. The next thing that we're going to talk about is teaching. So you can have a well put together plan. You've done all your research. You understand what stops operations. You've put together these great responses to events. Well, if you haven't taught your employees how to respond and how to deal with the plan, then your plan doesn't have any value, right? So imagine a football coach putting together the best game plan in the world, and then if he doesn't get that to the players don't have any idea what to do on the field. And same thing here. So as you're putting these things together and you're getting at the point where you actually have plans, I would like you to consider creating a culture of training and adherence to these plans, right? You want the team to understand who does what, how they get information they need, where is this plan located. Teach everybody that different people will have different roles and responsibilities. You're going to teach your team how they'll be communicated in an event. And so once you start teaching your folks all of these things, they're going to get smarter. And then your response when you have an event is going to be much, much quicker. So now some ideas on the slide of how to share that information is, number one, you can do lunch and learns, right? We as a firm do them all the time. We do lunch and learns, and we have people on our internal team that will cross-train the other members on certain things. You like lunch and learns. You could put it as part of your formal HR training to address, when people are hired, maybe once a year or every 6 months, address business continuity events and planning and roles and communicate how all of this stuff is put together. So that's our suggestion to you. Now, the last component here after teaching is arguably one of the most valuable. So of course, the value is in the process, the value is in the journey. You're going to get tons of value out of brainstorming, tons of value out of understanding and wrangling information. But from my experience, this provides really, really good actionable data is to test what you put together. You can have a terrific program and terrific brainstorming sessions. What you're going to find is as you test, as you have controlled tests of what you've developed, you're going to find shortcomings and you're going to find needs that you need to do to change that plan to make it better. And that's okay. That's the value in the process, and that's why you do it. And I've been parts of BCP testing where things didn't go quite as we wanted them to. And you know what? That's great. That's what we want to know, because when there's a real event, you don't want to have the same discussion. You want to already have dealt with that in a test, and then you're running smoothly when there is an event. So another value to the test is you're going to find things that you can spend money on. And so what I mean by that is you may find some critical system or some type of layer of DR that you need to put in place to support your business that nobody realized before. And this is going to be something that's found in a test. And then you can very easily take it to ownership and say, look, we found this in the test. We're going to need it to run smoothly in a BCP event. And then you can potentially budget for it. Or, it gives you the ability to potentially to get that thing moving through, through procurement and everywhere else. So testing tabletops, they're terrific. Tabletop is where a bunch of people get in a room and you give everybody a piece of paper with an event written on it, and everybody sort of considers it, and they talk about their response and their roles in that response. It's a tabletop, and it's a good mental exercise, and it takes you through everything, and there's a lot of value to that. In addition to that, a live test is really, really valuable. What a live test is actually a hot test. You say, okay, as of this date, we're gonna mimic that we all can't get to the office, and we're gonna do it one evening or whatever, and we're gonna try to figure out how we work. A very common thing to live event test is we're gonna shut the internet off at the corporate office. We're just literally gonna turn the firewall so it can't receive data. What do we do? How do we work? Right? And then so what you do is you go through your plan and say, okay, if the internet's off, or I don't have this service, what do I do? You go through your plan and you sort of enact it. And what you'll find is, well, this didn't work, or this needs more bandwidth, or whatever, our backup needs this. And you're gonna document all those things. And then you're gonna incorporate those responses back in your plan, and anything you find, again, you'll be able to potentially pivot your operations and address. I mentioned it very briefly a second ago. Everything you need to do in these tests needs to be documented. Right? You're going to document everything. When in doubt, everything I've talked about, you're gathering information and you're documenting. So the test is no different. Document all your findings. Failure is a positive. That's what you want. If you have a live event test and everything was perfect, that makes me really nervous. Right? You're going to find failures, or you're going to document them and then address them. And my suggestion is, I've seen firms of reasonable size be very, very successful. 2 of these a year. Be very, very successful with maybe one tabletop BCP, brainstorming session, and then another live event test. And that, takes a couple of days of work total throughout a year. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. And I've been talking a lot about how everything is iterative. It's cyclical, right? All the little diagrams I showed you a few slides ago, that's what they said to you. All of the things that I just described, which is wrangling information, brainstorming events, creating plans to address those, teaching and testing, all those things can be done over and over and over and over. And it creates a really successful and mature business continuity planning program, right? You're never done with this. There's never a point where you get the book of all your plans and you hold it up and you say, we've done it. That's not what this is, right? Yeah, it's terrific. You have a run book then. But the process is where the value is. It's the journey. So I'm going to take a moment now. I'm going to summarize what we've talked about today. And then after the summary, we'll get to questions and move forward. So the summary. The overall concepts that I've talked about today are not incredibly complicated, right? You wrangle information. You brainstorm potential events and how you would address those. You create plans wrapped around those events. You teach your team what you've created, and then you test, right? You can begin this now with very little spend. You don't need specialized software, only your effort, maybe a partner, maybe somebody like IronEdge, maybe you need the very specific team, right? You can begin with very little spend. Inherent to the journey, your team will become smarter, your plan will mature over time, and you'll make strides to be a more resilient company. Right? The journey is the key. So by understanding the relative simplicity of the components that I've showed you today, the value of the process and the importance to your business, I implore you, begin this today, invest in your team and your business today, and become more resilient today. That's it. Thank you. So now I want to take a few moments and review your questions, see what kind of follow-up needs we may have. This presentation will be made available to everybody. We'll post it on our social. You can go back and refer to it. There's links at the end of the presentation embedded in this presentation of different resources, including FEMA, Project Management Institute, FINRA, things like that. There's some links that you can use to kind of get smarter on this information. So let me now.
I got this one, Dan.
You got it? Okay.
Yeah, so we had a question, should business continuity plan include succession planning for key personnel? One of the things that Dan touched on, which I thought was really important, was when you identify your business impact analysis, when you're going through and you're looking at these processes and systems that support your organization, what you want to make sure that you do is, if you've identified people that are core to the success of those particular pieces of your business, whether that's a partner, stakeholder, somebody who's got what we call tribal knowledge of a very specific system. You want to kind of draw that out and document it as best you can. And as you document your continuity plan moving forward, you really want to focus on assigning a position to the process. And as Dan had mentioned, whether you say that's your IT administrator or whether that is your head of accounting, or however you want to phrase that in the plan, and document the processes around that. So those key personnel, if they're no longer with the organization, if they're unavailable during an event, like during a hurricane, some people just aren't available or they're sick in the middle of a pandemic. That way you've documented the processes that are required for you to function as an organization, and you're able to begin to extract that information, the processes, and the day-to-day things that make that person such a key part of your organization, right? And a lot of the times that will actually spill into line of succession planning, right? And kind of looking at what those things do. Like within our organization, when we were a much smaller company, there was a lot of things that I just did. And over time, in line of succession planning and building out our BCP, we've begun to offload those responsibilities to multiple people within the organization so that we're cross-trained on them. And I am less impactful if I'm unavailable in the middle of an event, and other stakeholders can be assigned as part of that incident response plan and part of the BCP. So absolutely, succession planning is something that should be part of any good business continuity plan over time. I don't know that I would include it inside your business continuity planning documentation as line of succession, but as you go through the process, the iterative process of building out your business impact analysis and what these processes look like, you'll begin to identify those key personnel and what they do, and how to start assigning other people or cross-training other people in your organization so that if they're offline, so to speak, in the middle of a disaster, your business will continue to function, and you'll be able to weather those storms.
Great. You're welcome. Any other questions here at the end? Thank you for the question, Glenn.
Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We're out of questions. We appreciate your time. If you are an IronEdge customer and you have any additional questions about business continuity planning, please feel free to reach out to myself or your account manager, and they'll give you some more information on services that we might have available to help you during this time. My advice to everybody, as Dan had said, you're in a live exercise right now. Take notes, write stuff down, start building your plan out. But I want to thank Dan. I want to thank the entire sales and marketing team at IronEdge Group. We appreciate everything that you guys have done to put this together. If you're not a current client with IronEdge Group, feel free to reach out to our team, sales@ironedgegroup.com, and we'd be happy to engage with you and see if there's something we could do to help you with your BCP planning. Other than that, you guys have a great week. And if you're interested in business intelligence, we've got a great webinar on Thursday, so please join us for that. And next week, we'll be talking about disaster recovery tools and processes. Thank you so much.